Thanks, Laura. So my name's Dan Connolly, and I'm the programme leader of the Community and Youth Work provision at the University of Sunderland. Um, and we've been teaching community and youth work in different formats at Sunderland for best part of 50 years now. And we were keen when we were revalidating the programme a few years ago to reinvigorate our community development roots on the programme. And we were fortunate to get support from Laura, from Val at ESB, to be able to get validation, ESB validation for our programme alongside our validation to run the youth work programme through the NYA. And one part of that reinvigoration of our community development roots was the partnership with the Meadows in North Shields that Karen will be talking to you a little bit more about. And the nature of that partnership is threefold, really. We have students on placement. We had a traditional student from our BA programme on placement with Karen last year. We have one of our degree apprentices. It is a new programme in the UK. We were the first alongside just 4 other higher education institutions to start running a degree apprenticeship in community and youth work in 2023. So we have a degree apprentice, TJ, who works at the Meadows with Karen, and also Wendy Gill, who's also on the call and teaches on the programme, is a member of the board at the Meadows and has been supporting Karen in this process of what we're referring to for this webinar as forward to our roots, in providing inputs to the board as a member of the board, but providing inputs around community development to the board, to the trustees at the Meadows. I'm very keen for the time to be taken up with what Karen has to say about the Meadows. So with that as a bit of an intro, I'm going to hand over to Karen.
Thanks, Dan. I'll let Laura do the presentation. So if we could just skip that slide, Laura, and we'll go straight into.
Okay, no worries. Can everybody see that? See that? Is everybody showing for everybody? Grand. Okay. There we go.
Hi everyone. As Dan said, I'm Karen Ainsley and I'm the Chief Officer at the Meadows. I've got a long history with the Meadows and the area that it's in. I started my sort of professional career as a youth worker in North Tyneside in the very early 90s, so a long time ago. And I remember the Meadows being built in 1992. So yeah, I've got a long history with the place. So the Meadows is a large community centre and hub, and we've got masses and masses of services there, literally from birth until, older age. We're oldest volunteer at the moment's 95. She's called Millie, and she's been volunteering with for the last 20 years. Volunteers in the community garden and rules us with a rod of iron. And by the time you're 95, that's okay. She's perfectly entitled to do that. She did tell me a little while ago it was on her 95th birthday. She's intending to hand her resignation in. And I said, "Oh, you're leaving?" Well, she said, "Yeah, I think I can only give you about another 5 years or so." So, we're going to have her there for a while yet. The community garden where Millie volunteers is a really important community resource, and we've worked really hard over the last few years to develop that. And if Laura sends the presentation out, there's a link on the back page that takes you to our website. But more importantly, it takes you to a video about the garden and how it's developed as a community space. So it's gone from a derelict piece of land to an amazing space within the last few years. We've got community planting beds and polytunnels and art trail and all sorts of things. We hold community harvesting events because, people in our area don't have much money. So they can come and harvest apples and pears and, rhubarb or strawberries or whatever, fruit and veg. Which they're getting for low or no cost, more importantly, and they're getting fresh organic fruit and veg that they probably just couldn't afford to buy. We've got a community cafe that sometimes cooks with the stuff from the gardens. We do that quite a lot. We provide low cost meals. We never ever make any money on the cafe and never ever will, because that's not its focus. It's around providing that accessible, welcoming environment, and it really is a community sort of informal space. It also provides tea for the kids coming in for our after-school childcare service. So sort of everybody avoids the cafe from sort of 3:30 onwards when it's closed for the kids, and we have about 50 kids having their tea there every night, which is very loud, can I just say? If you could just move on to the next slide, Laura, that would be great. So, as an organisation, our vision is to be part of creating a thriving community that's a good place to live, work and play. Obviously reviewing our strategic document that's going to take over the next sort of 3 years. And the wording of that will change because I think it's really tweaked, but the ethos will stay the same. Our mission is to work positively with local people to achieve that shared vision. And what aims that community involvement has to be key to it. And it's using community development principles to bring people together to identify the issues for them and for the families and for the area, and help sort of find the change that's needed, the solutions to those issues. And we do that in various ways. Skills development's really important for us because, as I'll explain, long-term unemployment or underemployment is a massive issue for people within our area. And quite often they don't even know they can have aspirations, never mind have aspirations. So developing those skills and so that they can, have aspirations, have ambitions and have ways to fulfill them is really important for us. Well-being is really important, as I'll explain. Sort of things it's really important that we develop services and support around physical and mental health and helping to develop resilience. And that's got to be key to everything we do as well. If we could just have the next slide, please. So, brief history. We were built in 1992, and it was at a time, and I'm not sure if people have Googled, but Meadows is in Meadowell, and if you Google Meadowell, it's usually fairly negative stuff around the area that comes up. What doesn't come up is it's amazing sort of community roots. It's working class community that is around supporting each other. But people on the estate are very much dependent on benefits. We are in it's the Churton and Percy Main electoral ward, and it's made up of 3 estates: Churton, Percy Main and Meadowell. And it's within the 15% most deprived wards in the country. And it was within the most 10% deprived wards until very recently, when it went to the most 15% deprived wards. That's the category we're in now. That isn't because the lot of people on our estates have changed. That's because they changed the ward boundaries, so the demographics changed. People could go, oh, it's improving. Yeah, not for the majority of people that we work with. They're more likely to be relying on in and out of work benefits, poor physical and mental health, lower educational attainment, be more likely to be victims of crime than people in other area and other wards. And I think the most sort of damning statistic is that people in our ward on average died 10 years earlier than people from St Mary's ward, which is just over a mile away. And I think that kind of puts it in a nutshell. The organisation was built, the building was built at a time when lots of resources were being made available to the area for lots of reasons. And that was great. But what it was that lots of the resources came with strings attached. There was lots of criteria applied to them. And one of them was that, new housing desperately needed to be built, but central government decreed that local government could only build new houses if they sold some of the housing stock off. So some of the houses got then sold on to social landlords, social housing provider. New houses were built, but it wasn't with the community. So some people within the community who very much had made the house, that it was their home and it was the heart of their family, they were forced to move, and their homes were demolished, and new housing was built. That's we needed the new housing, but that didn't do anything to engage those young people with statutory services and the local authorities. Money was pumped in to do things like job creation schemes and employment services, but it didn't really look at what the underlying reasons were, sort of why there was that long-term unemployment, and what could be done to sort of deal with that. So at a time when local authorities and central government should have been building up trust and doing things with people, people felt it was done to them rather than with them, and that to an extent still survives today. That feeling around sort of local and national government. If you could move to the next slide, Laura. So then austerity came and sort of kicked us all in the backside. And the people in areas like ours probably suffered more than anyone else because they were reliant on services so much, and services were cut. So some of the support that they'd been accessing that wasn't available anymore. Thresholds to access services became higher and higher. So people were falling through the net. And funding for things ended. If it wasn't a statutory service, it got cut. And one of the things that really sort of paid the price was youth work. And as I said, I remember the building that I now work in being built in the early 90s. And when I came to work there, I think one of the saddest things for me was that I found there was no youth provision there anymore. There is no centre-based youth work in Meadowell. And I, that was just one of the saddest things. And the pandemic came along. And there was money available for it to work differently, but inevitably the community suffered. And I don't think things have ever got back the same for a lot of people. We discovered we started a sensory play session as part of our warm welcome, because when we do warm welcomes, it's about preserving people's dignity. We never want anyone to come into our centre just to keep warm. They come in to do something. So they might come in for a cooking group or a craft group or whatever, but families with young children weren't coming. So we started sensory play. And that's great. I mean, it is very, very messy. They've just changed the name of it to Messy Play, and I think that describes it more. People are carrying their children covered in squished strawberries and all sorts of stuff along the corridor to sort of take them to clean them up after the session. But what we realised was that new parents didn't have those opportunities that had been around before the pandemic in terms of play groups and toddlers and things like that. So they were really isolated. They didn't have that peer support. And there wasn't anywhere for them to really learn skills around communicating with their babies or play. So we do that. And, we've got amazing support from the speech and language team. We've got support from a breastfeeding organisation. So we have all of those people come in and help out. And that's amazing. And we do things a little bit differently after COVID, and we've learned a lot from that. And then we've had, people probably know, but one of the biggest funding crises for charities that I ever remember. And lots of large funders have closed their doors. And others sort of temporarily closed their doors while they reviewed what they were doing. There's a lack of multi-year funding, and all of that's impacted on the work that we deliver. There's less money available and there's more people in need. So we've continued to meet people's needs, but it's increasingly been done in a way that was created around the funding that was available rather than the actual need that people had identified. And it's how you kind of marry those two things up. If we could go to the next slide, Laura. So there was something of a drift, and that drift took further and further from the community development approach that was the founding sort of principles of our organisation. The focus became sort of how many grants we could get, how much money we could bring in, rather than what that money was there to do. And that moved, our board of trustees had amazing skills, and I'm never going to say that they didn't, but they came from a very corporate background or public sector background. We had a chartered accountant, the retired head of urban regeneration from a local authority, a chartered surveyor who worked for a national firm. Brilliant, they've got amazing skills. What none of them had was a background and a history of working with people in the voluntary sector. They'd never worked for a small charity. They didn't have any idea what community development was. It was something that was really alien to them. And as that shift for the board happened, it also happened for the leadership in the organisation. They didn't come from a community development background. So then you've got sort of nobody in leadership roles who understood why the centre was built and what the purpose of it was. So it became less important when you were employing staff for them to have that understanding of community development. And that was kind of what I came into, and it very much became about, let's look at how we can get money to keep the centre open, rather than let's keep the centre open to do what we need to be doing for the people in our estate. So things like Thrive Daycare, which is an amazing service, and it's adult daycare for adults with additional needs, and it's a wonderful, wonderful service, and is really incredibly inclusive and has the ethos that everyone, absolutely everyone, should have the same opportunities, but they might just have to be delivered differently. So the people who come in for Thrive, you know, they work in our woodwork shop and produce amazing things. We hold a festival every summer in the garden, which is called Thrive Fest, and it's a music festival, because everyone should have the opportunity to go to a festival if they want to. And it's, you know, people who are part of Thrive perform at that festival, and their friends and family come along, and local artists perform, and it's a brilliant day. But it changed the focus of the centre, and when I started, a few people had sort of reflected to me that it felt more like a day centre than it did a community centre any longer. And how you balance that is really difficult, because you don't want to alienate anyone. It is a centre for everyone, and that's been a sort of really hard balancing act. But it was the direction that the organisation had been taken in. Let's just look at how we can bring money in rather than anything else. And I can't lie that one of the things that was really difficult, politics with a small p, politically, voluntary organisations across the borough found it for some reason very difficult to come together. And particularly within our electoral ward, there's 4 charities. And unfortunately, the leaders of 2 of those charities absolutely hated the bones of each other and wouldn't speak to each other, wouldn't even be in the same room if they could help it. And that reflected badly on us all. Funders were saying, you know, you've got 4 organisations so close together, why aren't you working in partnership? You don't want to say to the funders, well, actually, because some of them hate each other and won't work, won't play together nicely. So that was a really, really difficult culture to come into. So we'll go to the next slide, please, Laura. So what changed? Well, I came into role in 2023 at the very end. Halloween. I'm not sure what that says about it when I started on Halloween. And I was quite shocked at some of the things that I came in, and one of them was that there was no youth work and things. So what I started trying to do, and I was the first leader in the organisation from a community and youth work background for a very long time, and I've been trying to think about it, and I think it's possibly ever that they've had a leader in the organisation who was a professionally qualified community and youth worker. So I came in with kind of maybe a different viewpoint to the people who'd been there before, and it was quite difficult. And I worked with the board to explore where I saw the organisation sort of needing to go and why. And they knew they wanted change, because that's why they employed me. And the things that I'd said that I could do or wanted to do in interview. But I don't think they understood why they wanted that change or what that change should look like. So that was quite difficult. Talked about all the new funding challenges. Politically, we were seeing that huge shift to the right, and my community, our residents, were ripe for the picking from right-wing organisations. You know, they target the people who have the most to be angry about, and our residents have every right to be angry, but all that's happening is they're directing that anger in the wrong direction. And at the same time, we had a slight change in dynamics in the demographics in the area, where we had people who'd come seeking sanctuary, asylum seekers, when they got leave to remain. Some of them were being accommodated in our area. And they were being, in lots of ways, made to feel very welcome. But at the same time, I've got flags sort of flying from the lampposts sort of up and down the street outside our centre. So that was all a really difficult balancing act. And I was determined that we had to find a way as an organisation to meet all of those challenges. And part of it for me was, I've said that the trustees had a brilliant experience, but none of it in community development. And thankfully, I knew Wendy and I've known Wendy for many, many years. We used to share an office when we both worked for North Tyneside Council Youth Service many years ago. So maybe it was that loyalty, or maybe she did loyalty to me, that friendship. But anyway, somehow I managed to get her to come on the board, and it's been brilliant because Wendy was able, as a board member and a member of the board who understood community development, she was able to challenge the board in different ways to me, and she was able to support the board differently to change their understanding to the way that I could. So that was a real change. And working with the team was something that changed as well. And not all of them liked that change that I envisaged, that I thought was quite important. Some of them did, and I found out later were actually too anxious to say that they did. And some people left, and that was okay. And new people joined the team, and that was brilliant. And what was lovely was that some people within the team who maybe hadn't felt that they had a voice changed roles and have completely changed the dynamics of the organisation and have developed this passion, this enthusiasm and a massive commitment, and that's just been incredible. And one of the biggest changes was that in the last 6 months, the two leaders of other voluntary sector organisations who hated each other have both left, and I got new leaders in. So we've got 4 organisations now. We meet regularly, we work in partnership, we support each other. If I struggle with something, I can drop an email or make a call to one of them, and vice versa. And it's changed so significantly to the point that we're in the process of developing a sort of strategic partnership and partnership agreement in preparation for new government funding that we know is on the horizon. So we're really, really showing that united front, which is just great. If we go to the next slide, Laura. So as you know, as a strategic response, we've managed to sort of still do everything we need to do. Support the board to look at funding differently, develop a new robust funding strategy that meets those structural and systemic needs, as well as the keeping the lights on, I suppose. Looking at sort of small grants, but capacity building to enable to go for bigger and longer term funding as well. Funding that will really make a difference. You know, one of the things is for me is around, I think that we're going to bring change by enabling people to access good, stable, well-paying jobs. We've got families on the estate who are frightened to get a job because they can't get a job with enough money to take them off benefits altogether, and their benefits is affected by whatever they earn. So they're trapped, they're absolutely trapped. So until we can get employment for people in our area that actually takes them out of that benefit trap, nothing's going to change. So it's things like that. So we've gone for this big bid as a partnership, and it's around climate action. And I was determined that part of that was around developing work with businesses and industries, you know, the green industries that have sprung up along the Tyne. Why are people from our estates not working there? Why don't they feel that they can even go for a job there? So it's about developing those relationships, having funding to provide support, provide proper employment support to help people develop the skills they need to go for the jobs. But then working with the organisations to say, you know, those industries to say, do people really need those qualifications, or can they come in and get on the job training? How can we support you to enable that to happen? You know, how long would you like us to support people once they're in employment? Quite often it would fail within the first 6 months. So what if we gave people that support for the first 6 months or even longer in a job to make sure that it's going to be a success for them? Can those industries provide placements so people get an experience what it's like to have a job like that? Will they do guaranteed interviews? So all of those things are really important, and that's kind of where I see us changing and moving in terms of the direction that we're going in. So I say changes to the board were really essential, and changes to the staff team. What I found was, and I think it's the same in lots of grassroots organisations, was that the roles had become about the person rather than about the need, the skills. So we very much changed that. We've restructured the management team, so I've got more capacity to actually do the sort of partnership work and to do the funding and things like that. and also changing the dynamics in the team. If we go on the next slide, please, Laura, that would be great. So what does the future look like? Well, I'm not looking for the unicorns because, we've already got one of them at the Meadows, and that's Sarah, who's our community development lead, looking quite exhausted. So I've got no idea what it was she'd been doing, but that's the sort of thing you often find in our hallways as you're having a little wander around. But we're going to keep doing what we do to a large degree. And in our specialist alcohol service, whose funding is actually under threat, I was lucky enough to be invited to go into the women's peer support group a little while ago. It was before Christmas. And one of the women said, and it stuck with me to still now, she said she'd been alcohol dependent for over a decade and is now not drinking and hasn't drank for the last 6-7 months now. And she said, I know I have another relapse in me, but I also know I haven't got another recovery in me. And that's why this place is so important, why this group's so important. This is my lifeline. And that tells me that a lot of the stuff that we're doing, we need to carry on doing because we are making that change for people. And we'll also keep trying to bring that longer term change. And I've talked a little bit about how we're going to do that. And I think some of that is through the employment aspect. Some of it is about just letting people know that they can challenge. They can challenge things that happen in their community that they don't like, that aren't positive, but they can also challenge power, and we can help them do that. We can support them to do that. Continue working with our partners, and also just recognise that, as I say, I'm not looking for the unicorn, and it might just be changing things for people one at a time. And Dan talked about sort of the apprenticeship route through the university. We've got a young man who works for us, and when I came in, he joined us as a Kickstart apprentice, and he was working part-time as a community garden assistant. He'd been kept on, and I recognised the potential in him. He's a great lad, and he's loads and loads of potential, and he's a really talented musician, and he's in band and things like that. And now he's doing a degree in community and youth work as an apprentice at Sunderland University. He was born 2 or 3 streets away from where our centre is. That's where he grew up. And it never entered his head he could go to university. And now he is. And he's going to leave university with absolutely no debt and in a much more powerful place than where he was 5 years ago, because now he's a role model for other young people in our area. And he's he's there, he's the proof they can do it, that things can change. So, we've maybe changed things for him, and I've got other people got the next one, my sights set on the next person, a young person we've employed who I think would, it might not be community and youth, but she's got such potential. She'll fly. She'll absolutely fly. So we change things one at a time. But, for TJ, the lad who's gone to university, he's going to change things as well. So, yeah, don't look for unicorns, maybe change it one bit at a time. And I think Wendy might want to say a bit about her experience of coming in as a trustee. So if we just end the slideshow.
Yeah, sure.
Did you want to say anything, Wendy?
Yeah, happy to. So yeah, as Karen said, she approached me and asked me if I would like to be on a board of trustees, and it was something I hadn't thought about for a while. I had been on a board of trustees before, and and it was hard work because it is time consuming because you have to commit. But as Karen, my first job was in 1992. I got employed as a sessional community and youth worker on Meadowell Estate, and one of the first things that I did in my team was we consulted with residents around what the new community centre should look like. So I have had a vested interest in that building and its history and that estate, because I ended up working there for over 27 years. So I thought, yeah, I'd like to go back. And I remember I had an interview and was accepted and invited along to the board. And the first time I went, I got off the metro station, which is not even a minute's walk away to the community centre. There's a direct path from the metro station to the community centre. And I got off and there was 36 young people, because I counted them, just hanging around on the metro station. I was like, right, okay, this has changed. Where's the youth provision? Why are they all on the on the metro lines again? I walked to the community centre and our board meeting was held in what I knew was originally built as the youth wing, and it was empty apart from us having a board meeting. And I thought, wow, I've got a lot of catching up to do. A lot's changed. A lot of things have happened, but also I felt as though I wanted to spend the first, I suppose, my time just getting to know the board and listening and finding things out, finding out how they worked, but also being aware that my history, I didn't want to cloud any judgment going forward. There'd been a period of time I didn't know what had happened, and not to quickly come to judgments. But I felt when I started the board and I did listen, that the power dynamic was very much, the board was very powerful. It was a top-down approach, or some members of the board were powerful. And decisions were made on historical practice. And I think by being a new member, I was able to ask questions that possibly people were happy to answer, and it didn't look as though I was being very intrusive, because I did want to know the information. But I think by asking those questions, it also created a space where people had to think about, actually, why are we doing this practice? Why are we working in this way? How did it come about? And is it the best way going forward? I think there was also some blurred lines. The board members had got very used to making decisions that I think were employee decisions. It would be nothing for a board member to go into the centre and make decisions around staffing and pay, and without any consultation with Karen or the board. So I think me coming into the board and starting to ask those questions and putting a different frame on the questions I was asking, and also trying to frame the conversation from that top-down approach to bottom-up and around conversation, rather than telling you what you were going to do. I think it started to, it didn't put the board into that storming phase of a group, where some people did feel challenged. Some people were happy and found a voice in a space that they felt they hadn't had a voice before, and those talents and those skills that they had were coming to the forefront. So we created a space where I think as a board we could start having conversations. And we did have that storming phase where some people left and other people came. But from that, we were able to actually stop and say, we now realise some of the decisions or the way we've been working possibly isn't conducive, and it isn't listening to what's actually happening for the people who are coming into the centre, what they want on the estate. So we put time in for us to go away as a board, and we had a development day, which I know probably for those of you who've been involved in a board of trustees before in community centres, these things happen regularly, but I don't think it had for a while. I don't think the board had given themselves time to sit and look at them and what they wanted. At the same time, what we also did was we decided to change the annual consultation that the staff team did with each other, and it was a survey that went out and asked people, do you like working here, what's great about it? And it was a tick box exercise, so the board would get that information back and say, look, everything's shiny and lovely, everybody loves working here. However, the culture within some parts of the centre, it wasn't functioning as a whole. I think it was very little parts were functioning separately and functioning well, and different sort of teams had emerged and keeping themselves to themselves. And Karen have been really working hard on trying to have this, I suppose, conducive relationship where it was one team and people understood the benefits from each other's team. And as a board, we felt that that was a good place we could help and support as well. So rather than do the ticky box exercise, another staff member doing it with another staff member, we decided to do have a conversation with each member of staff and really put a lot of time in, and all of the board members were invited to be involved in that. And I think the board members who were involved, who did hold those conversations, were ones who'd never really been really proactive before, and that made a difference not only to the board, because they were hearing for the first time the experience of all of the staff, from receptionists to everybody, play workers, gardeners, everybody, and also the staff were able to have, I suppose, ask questions of the board and hold them to account and say, you know, this is how I've been feeling for a while, and now you've heard it, what are we going to do about it? I think for the board, that was very much a turning point. We had then an away day for the whole staff team and board members, which we looked collectively at culture, but also from the board training day. That was, I think, the first time as a team we were talking about community development, starting to use that language, starting to flip the dynamics from top down to bottom up approach, and not thinking that we as a board were the experts in everything and that we were going to be able to solve everything. But as a collective, as a whole team, and with the community, that we were more likely to be able to move forward with that. And Dan held that the away day, which was great, and it really linked community development values and principles directly with the mission statement and the values of the Meadows and what the team wanted. And I think where we're at with the board now, we're a lot more democratic. I think very much from a community development perspective, although I think we do have still some way to go. But we've now created smaller working groups. So when we come to have a whole board meeting, conversations have been had, things are presented, and it's more democratic in that everybody has a say and has an opinion, and there's more of a connection and a link to the work and the culture of the organisation. So that's it in a nutshell, but it's quite a lot, because when I joined the board, I think it was a year and a half ago. So as a team, I think we've really come far in our change, because we have had a lot of change, but also the fact that still a lot of people did remain on the board and they are happy to go through the change and they're happy to remain and move forward with the organisation. It feels a lot better, I think, as a board member as well. So
thanks, Wendy.
Thanks.
That's fantastic. I've got a couple of things that I wanted to ask, but I'm conscious of the time. I wanted to just give others a chance to respond to the inputs that we've had so far.
So just unmute yourself if you want to say anything.
Yeah, I'm Louise, sorry I didn't get a chance to introduce myself because I didn't come at the beginning. I teach the MA at Goldsmiths in community and youth work and community arts and community development. Thanks so much for that presentation. It's brilliant to hear about your organisation and see the sort of changes and the way that it's surviving and adapting. I was just curious to hear a little bit more about the connection, say, with students and placement students, and how that sort of has supported, or sort of you've experienced that within your project and your organisation.
Yeah, we took a student last year for the first time. I don't know if the organisation's ever taken a community and youth student from Durham before. No. So we took someone, and I don't think the team quite knew what to expect. We take lots of students. We've got the after school childcare service and stuff, so we get lots of students around the early years and things like that. But this was the first community and youth student, and it was interesting that it made the team think about what they were doing, because when I would talk about the thing, yeah, I wanted a project that she could take the lead on. And that was very much hers. And the project we when I talked to her, we chose was when I started, there was something going called it was a community safety meeting, and it had been started by the local authority and the police to talk to the residents, and it was as a result of lots of antisocial behaviour on the estate. But again, it was another one of those top-down things that the police and the council had started it. And when things were bad on the estate, I'd get 30 odd people turn up for the meeting. And if there hadn't been antisocial behaviour, people didn't think they needed to come along. So I tasked her and our students that we talked about it, and hers was about developing, and it hasn't happened yet because these things take a long time, but actually changing the narrative with people on the estate about what about if it was a residents meeting? What about if it was a residents forum? If it was yours and you invited the police to come along when you wanted them, and you invited the council? And I think that gave Erin a lot to think about the responsibility as a community worker, the responsibility that you have for the people that you're working with. So I know Wendy would say, like, where Erin would go sort of in and go, well, this is what happened this week, and this is, so it really gave her a lot of the opportunity to put that sort of theory into practice. And that's been excellent. And she actually does some sessional work for us now. And she's still very much part of the organisation. And then on the flip side, we've got TJ, who was a lad who started as a Kickstart apprentice, and who is now an apprentice community and youth worker doing the degree at Sunderland. And that's been amazing because he's now able to say to people, look, this centre's opened doors. But what it's done is it's opened doors to university, and that's something that we didn't think was possible. So we've come at it from the two different angles. And I guess the other thing we do is we take kids on work experience from the local high schools. And that's been great, getting them to talk to both TJ and Erin when she was on placement. So those kids who might have thought they were never going to go to university or hadn't thought about community and youth as a profession, well, then all of a sudden going, oh, do you know what? This is possible. So yeah, it's been a really, really brilliant relationship to kind of, it was always there, but just develop it that bit more so that we're really open to taking students on placement now. And now I feel confident that there are things that those students can do and learn from, because in the very early days, they'd be pushed in at an open door now rather than a locked one, or a closed one, which is what it would have been in the early days. So I don't know if hope that answers your question.
I was just going to say, could I add something in relation to the apprentice and university? So TJ, who Karen was talking about, they bring the practice into the classroom as well. So I teach on a module called Celebrating Acts of Resistance, and TJ asked at the start of the module if he could come in and do a session himself on community and resistance. And he's actually, after the break, he's going to be doing the next session. So it's lovely. He brings the practice back into the classroom, which is really what we want.
Oh, I'm dead proud.
Daniel, have you got a question?
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for the presentation. It's really interesting and great to get the perspective from both of you. My background's adult and community learning. I've worked for local government and charities and FE colleges as well. But I'm currently working on a project to scope out level 2 and 3 qualifications, which I'm trying to do using community development principles as much as possible. So I've been out in Greater Manchester speaking to different communities and people that work in those communities. And there's lots of great work going on, and people doing great work in a voluntary capacity, grassroots organisations doing good stuff, and even good strategy from the combined authority. But the language, and I think you mentioned language, Wendy, the language of community development is kind of hard to see. And in some place, people are reinventing the wheel. And I just wonder if you had any thoughts on how we could help people to stop reinventing the wheel and do, I love the title for the session, how do we move forward whilst sort of drawing on that richness of the roots of community development. And it's great to hear the example that's been successful in your organisation, but just wonder how we could expand that story so that it's a bit easier to see it elsewhere.
It's a massive question.
Sorry.
I'm just trying to think. I think definitely what with the language, what we did find were we were all, or people were using terms, and we all didn't have an agreed definition of what the. So definitely for the board, being clear about how we communicate and what we are saying, and it sounded very basic at the time, but I think that the feedback from the board when we did that session, very basic, what is community development, community action, community organising, was, I think, the one that got the most feedback. It was, oh, now we know what it's about. And I was like, oh, it was like a bit of a eureka moment, and from that momentum gained, but it really was going, I think, back to basics. I don't know what you think, Karen, with the staff team.
Yeah, well, I think the board as well. So thinking about when I first said to you, please will you run a session for the board on what is community development. And I remember you doing something in that session around Ornstein's ladder of participation, which is kind of your basics. And some members of the board go, oh well, I can see how that bit applies to our organisation, but not that bit, and I don't like that term, and I don't think we should use it. And we would never manipulate people. And I was like, do we not? Let's ask ourselves if we really do that, because if you look at a piece of funding, it might not meet exactly what it is the people in our community are asking for. So is there not an element of manipulation there around kind of changing what we do to meet the funding criteria? And they were like, oh, right. And it was that very basic kind of think about what we're doing. You might just want to say, no, we never manipulate people. But on the other end of the scale, how much is that participation of people in our community real? How much say do they actually have? And I do think that was quite difficult for the board to hear. I think for some of them, they got involved and they thought a community centre would be really, really nice, and that we would do like knit and natter groups, and it would be lovely. And I'm sure there are community associations and things where that is wonderful, but actually you don't do, we could have those things, but in an area of such deprivation, of such need, and of such potential, it needs to be much, much more. And I think Wendy helped that. We've got the Detached Youth Project, which is another one of the charities in the area, in our ward, and the new chief executive in there, he runs level 1 and level 2 youth work courses. So he gets people on the estates into those courses so they start to understand the language. I'd like in a few years' time to be able, it doesn't even have to be a few years' time, to take it that one step further and look at sort of community activism and how can we do something around community development within the centre. And that's when I go back to Dan and Wendy and go give us a hand in delivering that.
Yeah, and I think that's, I'm just thinking about the response to Daniel's question and trying to think of it in terms of infrastructure. I suppose what we were able to do with the Meadows was linked to the infrastructure that was already there through the university and the infrastructure of the prior existing professional and personal relationship between Karen and Wendy. So there was some institutional, there was some which was about networks and friendship relationships. And I suppose to do the same in Manchester or anywhere else around the country, it would be about thinking, well, who is available in the infrastructure who could tell that story in a similar way, not identical, of course, but in a similar way or with a similar impact in Manchester, as the way that Karen and Wendy have been able to tell the story in Sunderland. And I suppose, again, you could be thinking about universities and, of course, lots of the community unions work courses that used to be available, for instance, at Man Met, and people like Janet Batsley are no longer available, but those people are still around, and those people are still as passionate about community development as they ever were when they were employed professionals in it. And I suppose, you know, it's a question for Val, for Laura, for ESB, for community development infrastructure organisations to think, how can we support like the work that you're doing, Daniel, in Manchester, to make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel and actually saying to people, look, what you're trying to do here is based within, it has a very strong theoretical base, it has a very strong practice base, and you're heading in the right lines. Here's some examples from history of what worked, of what didn't work, what does work, what doesn't work. So it's about just trying to bring those people in, because they are there, but of course, because community development has a much lower profile than it used to have years ago, it's maybe working hard to try and find out who those people might be.
Yeah, I think don't be frightened to ask the question. Don't be frightened to ask people if they will help. The worst that can happen is what? No. And then you just ask somebody else, because there are people out there.
Yeah.
And ask communities, you know, community organisations like me going to Phoenix Detached Youth Project and working with them. You know, they only employ professionally qualified community and youth workers. They have stuck to their guns. They've stuck to that ethos. They're a brilliant resource. There'll be those organisations around Manchester.
I think something that you did, Karen, really well, which kind of is more unusual than people might expect, is to have a real strong sense of your history.
Right.
And I think, you know, if you kind of know where you've been, it's easy to kind of see where you're going. Whereas if you think you're doing something for the first time, then you're in a different position. So yeah, I think you're right, Dan. That storytelling was a core competency for community development, isn't it? But the power of story here, I think, is really important.
Val, have you got Val's just put something in the chat. I don't know if you're going to refer to that, Val, or whether you've got another point.
I've got another point, but Jim was before
Right,
me.
sorry, yeah, I was just going to say whether it's that or, but have you got something, Jim?
2 points, one for Karen and also something for Dan. I'm not actually a professional fan of community organising, but what is actually quite clear in your area, Karen, is that community organising has been very, very significant contribution over the last couple of years. And just on your doorstep, nearly 200 people gathered just a few weeks ago, you know, to discuss what was actually happening. And the campaigns there, you know, have been dealing with racism on the metro and other very, very real community things. So as I say, I'm not a fan of it. I'm more a community development oriented person, but I can recognize some of the issues that are community organising, working with schools and actually challenge the educational system in terms of money that's available for that. So there's a point there, if I may just to add to Dan, there hasn't been an aspect that the regional authority in the Northeast has given £24 million available to deal with child poverty and issues. And I just wonder, how do you educate your students into that access and make some inroads into how would you use the 24 million if you gauge that money is available now? It's not just a story. You know, I've got to assume that you know about that.
It is available, Jim, but it's available. And I'll go back to the kind of funding over the years that's had strings attached and has had set criteria. Because I went down to one of the combined authority roundtable events with the mayor a couple of weeks ago, and it was on developing childcare, you know, as part of the whole sort of end in child poverty. And it was about kind of preschool childcare or at school childcare, sort of that wraparound sort of breakfast and after school to help people into employment, because, you know, without employment, nothing's really going to change. And I was the only voluntary sector organisation representative in the room. And, you know, every local authority was represented, lots of private sector sort of childcare providers were represented. And for the entire Northeast, 11 local authorities or whatever, I was the only voluntary sector person that had been invited.
But that's the point I'm trying to raise.
And this is what I was reflecting back to Kim, who the mayor and other people in the room, that everything they talked about was sort of early years childcare services, which were Ofsted registered. They weren't talking about the kind of how to get money in. None of that money is available to my organisation for the after school childcare because it doesn't meet the criteria that they are providing the funding for. Yet I've always got a waiting list for kids, for parents to get their kids into my after school childcare, but because of the criteria around that funding, and I have got funding from the Combined Authority for other things, and I'm not going to say that I haven't benefited from it, but if we look at that kind of child poverty, again, it's those strings attached. It's that it's only going to, some of it's only going to schools, but none of the schools in our area provide that after school childcare. And actually, if they did, then it would cause huge problems for us because I would lose staff. I would have to close the service if everybody then provided the after school childcare. So there's a conversation about who should provide it. But then if it's who should provide it, then should the provider not have opportunity to apply for that fund, and it shouldn't just be directed at schools? And it's those conversations we maybe need to have with the sort of the teams at the Combined Authority, and the conversations I am having with them. But I thought it was quite telling. I was the only representative from a voluntary sector organisation. It felt like a weighty position to be in, me sitting in that room, kind of trying to be the voice of not just our ward, our borough, but of the voluntary sector.
How do we educate the voluntary sector?
Sorry?
How do we educate the voluntary sector? I mean, I live and work in the Northeast, and I go to meetings, and 75% of the people in the organisations in the voluntary sector don't know that money is available. So if they don't know it's available, how would they know to take part? So there's a lot of catching up to do because the voluntary sector has got caught managing the poor. It's not about change. It's not about community development. It's about managing the poor. And I know in Meadowell for the last 60 years, and nothing has changed. Nothing has changed in 60 years, and that's the challenge to the things. And that's where I do side a little bit with the community organising people, because one or two changes actually have come about, particularly in terms of money that's available for school meals and children. That went to a national level from North Tyneside about school meals, because the schools were actually taking the money, from the children without actually providing the meals. Politically, that was an argument in your area.
Thanks, Jim. Do you want to pick up, Val?
I was just picking up on Dan's comment. ESB is repositioning itself from just looking at quality assurances of courses. One of the things we've recently produced is a proposal paper about how we develop the community development learning infrastructure from sort of level 1 to 7 or 8. If any of you are interested, then Laura can send you a copy of it. It's an outline of what we'd like to achieve and the different ways we'd like to achieve it. And we're looking for partners who want to have some discussions with us, who want to refine it, who know who else we might think about going to, which big funders or organisations might be interested in different aspects of it. So it's a summary of some of the things that we think we need for infrastructure. We used to have one many years ago. With all the cuts, it died. So we're starting to do things. Obviously, we're starting with the webinars, trying to get to new people, talking to people. We've also, as I put in the chat, written a whole load of bite-sized sessions. These are little 2-hour things. What's CD? How do you work in a group? How do you avoid conflict or deal with it? How do you organise an event? And we've got those, they're available. And if you've got trainers and that and thing, we can offer certification. So we're starting to try and look at different things. We're working with universities to do maybe some bridging things at level 3 around bringing academics and community people together to do research in communities, which is rooted in communities. So we're just trying a number of different things to see if it will fly. So if any of you are interested in having a conversation with me, get in touch. I can send you the stuff, and it might be that we can just make some inroads somewhere on something. So if there's anything that you would like to talk about, but that we've put together that proposal paper at the moment. So if you want to have a read and have a chat, that will be really helpful, because you're absolutely right. We need to be able to bring people in, get them interested in informal learning, get them through learning, certificated learning, qualifications, and wherever they want to go, something they can take with them.
we have definitely overrun, guys. But has anybody got any other questions? It's been a really good discussion. But has anybody got anything else they want to bring up before we call it to a close? No, great. Well, it lands on me to say thank you again, Karen and Wendy and Dan as well. Thank you, all of you, for being part of this. I will send everybody a link to the video when it's up. I'll also send Karen's presentation if you're happy for me to do that, Karen, and make sure the links that you mentioned stay intact in that. If anybody's got any questions, anybody needs to bring anything up, please just get in touch. And thanks for coming.